Hello, friends. Nice to have you here. Thanks for joining me for another video interview here. Today, I have the pleasure to bring to you all my friend, coach, colleague here, Dax. Dax is an ex-psych patient, fellow misfit, and founder of Liminal Mental Health. She is a health mentor, an educator, and a consultant. And with a holistic approach, she teaches and equips those struggling with their mental health so that they can live fulfilling and empowered lives while treating them with dignity and compassion. So before I pass the microphone to Dax, I want to tell you all why I'm doing this interview, why I reached out to Dax. And I want to have this conversation with her today and share with you all, and probably more conversations with her. We're going to be talking here about this term mental health, and I put in quotes because we're going to explore a little bit how this term is not really accurate, although it's a term that everybody understands. But first of all, I want to put a disclaimer here. Dax and I are not doctors. We're not psychologists. We're not psychiatrists. We are here with the purpose of education. And we're not here to give medical advice to anybody. We're simply here to share information that we're both passionate about. And we want to empower you all in whatever you're dealing with. It can be from simple anxiety, mild depression, to bipolar disorders, whatever that is. This conversation is to include everybody in your stresses in general, and to empower you with some information, some tools, so you start understanding a little more what the process in your body, the body-mind is really about. So our intention here together today, it's simply to share information to empower you. And if you have questions, you can connect with us. You have our contact information. And again, we're not here to advise, to judge medical systems, to even judge pharmaceutical drugs. And at the same time, we're going to share some information so you can take it from there. So Dax, welcome. So good to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Dax, we're going to dive right into it.
Okay.
So I understand that when you were 2016, you were given a diagnosis of bipolar 1.
Yeah.
And with that, you were prescribed a lot of medications, drugs to deal with that. And at some point you realized that all those drugs, different drugs, that you're kind of being an experiment in a way. Yeah. They were not working. So I want you to start telling us all a little bit about, summarize that process for you. What was like to, first of all, have a kind of a scary diagnosis like that, like you have a brain problem, your brain is screwed up or something. And I want you to explore that. And what led you from that to get to a point that you decided to educate yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, yeah, sure. And so 2016, I became quite symptomatic. My major symptoms were insomnia, some depression, some anxiety like I've never had before in my life. I literally felt like my body was like I was spinning inside, if that makes sense. And I literally felt like the ground was coming out beneath me. Just had some kind of odd experiences like that. And so those were, and I was also having panic attacks, and what I later learned were body flashbacks. And so all that was happening, and I went to my general practitioner. I don't often go to doctors. I try to stay out of doctors' offices as much as possible, and I do go if I really need to. And anything that I had tried before, trying to eat right and exercise and all those things are good, but they were not doing the trick. I needed something more. And so I went to this doctor, and she prescribed me my first 2 psych meds, also gave me a questionnaire to see if I was depressed. And in fact, of course, I passed on that day. And so she deemed me as depressed, anxious, and gave me my first 2 psych meds. And then from there, it got worse. It got worse from there. And there's a lot of variables to that. But I wasn't getting any better. I went to a psychiatrist, got more meds. Essentially, I got the bipolar cocktail. I got one of those. She had not yet diagnosed me as bipolar. And then later I went to a treatment center. And there's a lot of things in between, as you can imagine, but I'm just giving a quick glimpse. At the treatment center, they did get me off of the benzo I was taking at the time, Klonopin. And that was a blessing in disguise. At the time, I was freaking out because, that was something that I felt was anchoring me. But they didn't allow benzos at that facility. And so I got off of that with 24/7 care, which I was grateful for. And it was really hard because I was getting introduced to my trauma, and a lot of that was being kicked up. And so I was having to deal with both of those things at the same time. And so I had a good experience at the treatment center, and I was still on a lot of psych meds. I was still not diagnosed as bipolar yet until I got out, found the psychiatrist who I worked with for about 4 years, who I still hold dearly in my heart. She's one of my most favorite people on the planet. And so while I will critique conventional psychiatry, I have my own. All right, she's not my psychiatrist anymore, but I still call her my psychiatrist. I had her, and I have acquaintances, friends, and colleagues who are psychiatrists, and some of them are really great at what they do. They usually do it differently than the mainstream, but they're amazing people. And so, I do critique conventional psychiatry, but there are some really good psychiatrists out there. So I do want to put that in there. And so anyway, I was diagnosed finally by this particular doctor, and she listened to my story for, probably at least 2 hours. We had a long appointment. It was the initial one, and she doesn't do things like other people do. And so we have, pretty long appointments. And she did ask me about relationships and, family of origin and things like that. But yeah, she finally diagnosed me with bipolar 1 because of the reported symptoms and the things she was observing. And that's important to note, that that's how people get diagnosed with, quote, mental illness. There's not like a blood test or a brain scan that are used for diagnostic purposes. It's the symptoms. And so if you have, like I did, these symptoms, these group of symptoms that fit into a particular diagnosis, then you'll get most likely that diagnosis. You may get a few, you maybe get a sub-diagnosis. And so that's how, you're diagnosed. And then you're told the story, usually about, that you have a chemical imbalance, or that mental illness runs in your family, and that's why you have what you have. And for me, with bipolar 1, I was told that it's chronic, that I need psych meds to manage it, and that I had a brain disorder or a brain disease. And so while that may sound troubling to some people, and it was to me in a sense, I was also glad that I got this is what's wrong with you. That kind of helped me, be put at ease. However, I went through phases with the diagnosis. At first, I was like, okay, finally somebody had the guts to tell me what I, quote, have. I started reading all about bipolar 1. I was going to hack it. I was going to figure this out. How am I going to get better? From the get-go, I was like, no, this is not my life. And again, I went, I ebbed and flowed, and I would become hopeless, feel helpless. But then there was always this undercurrent of, no, F this, I'm going to move through this. And so I always kind of had that fighting, power within me. Mm-hmm. And so, and then at one time the diagnosis, I started reading and researching, and I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. This does not make sense. And then I started finding, like the work of Dr. Kelly Brogan and Dr. Ellen Vora, like Gabor Mate, who else? The book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. Basil Vendel.
Yeah. I can't remember his name at this moment, but yeah. And so just started reading, finding other people who were looking, deeper into what we call mental illness, and, just scouring websites and medical journals, like all the things. I started off this process very intellectually. That's how I did it. And and then it moved into a different kind of investigation. It was more internal and societal for me. Yeah.
So I'm curious, it sounds like you found an amazing psychiatrist that actually took 2 hours of her time to ask you questions about relationships, your childhood history. And to be clear, that's very rare.
Yeah.
I just started work with a client who was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder when she was a teenager. And she saw more than 30 psychiatrists. And none of them once asked her about her history, about childhood trauma, what her environment was during her childhood. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that let's go straight to mental illness. I think we can connect these conversations now, childhood trauma, the environment that shapes our minds first before we really create a reality, or reality is created inside us. It starts in the womb of our mothers, then the environment that we grow up with our caretakers. So all that we know shapes our brain. So I want to debunk two terms that I really have hard times hearing now. One is this myth of chemical imbalance, that you have a chemical imbalance that is genetic. We know by now, because of so much studies of the brain and the process of body mind, we know that there isn't such a thing as chemical imbalance. And what there is brain development. What happened the first 3-4 years of our lives as a child, that it's crucial in our brain development, and the process or how much stress a child's exposed to, which is going to dysregulate her system, and how that child deals with stress. So we know all the processes begin there. And that's the reason we're bringing the word trauma into this conversation. So I want you to speak a little bit about this term, chemical imbalance, how it's not accurate, and also how we need to even, find a new term that different than mental health or mental illness.
Yeah. And so, we hear that, from doctors about the chemical imbalance theory. We hear it from just mainstream culture, just, from peers and whatnot. And that's by and large, it's the, it seems to me that that's the overall understanding about, quote, mental illness. I don't like the term mental illness or mental health, even though mental health is part of my business name. And we've talked some about that, but it's, we do need new language in order to view, I believe, these circumstances and these experiences as they truly are, because a lot of this vocabulary includes misnomers, or at least, it's limiting. Yes, there is a mental aspect of mental illness and mental health, of course, but it's so much more. And so going back to the chemical imbalance, it's only a theory. It hasn't been proven. And, if anybody's interested in that, you can go look and you can find some resources about this. But you do have to look. It's not like mainstream knowledge. A little bit more information is coming out, specifically around depression, and how that just may not be as much, of a chemical imbalance thing as they thought, which many of us already knew that. Just to some people, I bring that out on my page all the time about the chemical imbalance theory only being a theory. And people are like, wait, what? And I feel like I'm repeating myself, because I am, but this needs to be made known, because it's essentially, it's just a story. It's the story that, a lot of professionals tell patients when they do get diagnosed with something, because people want to know why. People want to know why, and that's natural. And I know why for my symptoms. And, I can talk about that all day long, but what I do with clients is I help point them to their innate wisdom and their awareness, their consciousness, and help them anchor it within themselves and, with the world at large and life force, so that they can explore and find out, what is going on for them. And that's what's really important, because there's nothing wrong with, choosing medication if that's your route. But for me, it just, it didn't go along with the truth that I found out for myself. It didn't align with that. It wasn't going to fix me. The medication was not going to fix me. Did it knock me out so I didn't have to think about some terrible thoughts? I didn't have to ruminate. I didn't have to experience the sensations of trauma coming up in my body. Sure. And it was welcomed at one point, but then I was like, no, this is no way to live life. And yeah, so I've just continually been asking questions after I found out that the chemical imbalance explanation is simply a theory. It's really just a story, and it's just not true. It's just not true. And when you find that out, then it's like, for some people it can be disorienting, because what does it mean if that's not true? Well, it means that some people that you've been trusting with your very life have not been telling you the truth, and probably not because they're bad people. It's just because what they have been told. It's how, doctors, psychiatrists have been trained. And that's what it is. It's been passed down. And then it gets passed down to the patients. And then why wouldn't you believe that? If you don't know what's wrong with you, maybe your psychiatrist would know. And that's why you're there. And so you believe them. But then there's plenty of psychiatrists who, I speak to, I interface with, and they're not down with the chemical imbalance, but many are. And so it's still, it's what people by and large believe about the root cause of mental illness. But I know for certain that it wasn't my root cause. And I suspect that it's not the root cause for many other people. Yeah.
Many other people. Yes, because what we're learning more now is that there's no such a thing like passing depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder through genetics, because it's not a genetic disease.
Right.
It's something that we've been seeing more and more and more in the last few years, and our genes don't change that fast. So that's already proved out there. And again, if anybody in the audience has a problem with what I'm saying, do your research epigenetics, research generational trauma.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to say what's passed from our parents or grandparents to each other is what Dr. Gabor Mate would say. It's sensitivities, is the trauma that gets passed. So if we come from generations of trauma, and a lot of times we don't know about this, because it's just now that we're making this conversation of trauma being accepted. It's talk more about, thank God, we have experts like Gabor Mate and Peter Levine and and other doctors and PhDs that did not accept the story of chemical imbalance any longer. They did not accept the story that we have a flawed, a defected brain, which is not true. So we know so much more. And I'm very grateful to a lot of these scholars, a lot of the academics who decided to say, like you did in your own process, like there's something that is not making sense here. So because of their passion, their research, we know more about this process called mental illness. Like you said, there's a mental aspect, but like any illness in the body, it might be heart, might be the lungs, the stomach, it's never an isolated problem. It's always a process of the entire body. And it's no different when it comes to something that we experience in the psyche, in our minds, basically. So I hope that all of you listening to this now is getting curious about, start to understand your processes. And if you choose to work with any doctor, that you choose to work with a doctor who's interested in your process, not in the diagnosis, but in the whole process that led you to develop such a thing as depression or anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder. But I wanna touch something here. It's a title of an article that I found that it's called Childhood Trauma is Not a Mental Illness. That is the title of the article. And this individual just starts by saying, I was born in 1982 in a divided family and grew up below poverty level. My mom had divorced my dad before I was a year old, and my family did not get together unless we had funerals to attend. From a very young age, I was abused verbally, emotionally, sexually, and physically by my parents and family members. In addition to suffering from an unstable home life, I was bullied by my peers and the popular kids at school. So fast forward here, then he, of course, this individual is having a lot of behavior issues. He's taken to the doctor by his parents. And by the time he was 10 years old, he says, I have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, borderline personality disorder, attachment disorder, adjustment, and the list goes on with all these diagnoses here. So the reason I'm sharing this very, very powerful story, and I'm just reading the first paragraph here, is that this is the reason I don't agree with just this diagnosis of mental illness, because he wasn't born, this person wasn't born with any mental illness.
Yeah.
What happened, he was brought into an environment with tremendous stress, a kind of stress that no child should go through. And that's not the point, to make anybody a victim, because as adults, we all have access to healing. And at the same time, it's so important, if any of you in the audience is struggling with any of these conditions, any of those disorders, get curious about your history, learn what happened to you. Because in this case, this person was given a lot of medications, and it wasn't until later on that he started doing therapy and understanding what was really causing all these so-called disorders. But it's just to say, none of these disorders were genetic.
Yep.
They were created by tremendous stress in the body, dysregulated nervous system, and not one adult to help him to self-regulate as a child. So with that said, how I'm going to go, without having you disclosing your childhood story, I want to go straight to how understanding your own trauma, connecting with your body, feeling the emotions, how did that process help you to heal this so-called bipolar disorder?
Yeah. So, when I was at that treatment center, that was my first realization that I did have trauma. And which that, going back to the diagnosis of, bipolar 1, most people know that I'm not really big into labels. However, the advantage, hindsight, of being diagnosed is that it made me sit up and take notice. Like, oh my God, like I have a brain disorder and it's permanent, and it, could kill me through, say suicide. And, so it made me take notice. And because if someone would have just said, okay, you have these symptoms because of trauma, I would have said, no, I don't have trauma. And I would have said, I probably would have just shook it off, because I still have that inclination to be like, no, I'm tough. I got this, like, it's fine. And I don't validate, myself. But I've done, a lot of work, or like inner child work, and then also parts work, which one form of that is like internal family systems. And that's a great way to learn to validate yourself and have tremendous self-compassion, and to be able to see yourself as sometimes weak, sometimes vulnerable, sometimes little, like all of that is okay. And you can be strong as you do that and hold yourself. And so I won't go into all that, but that has been absolutely, life-changing. But yeah, so, at this treatment center, I was not ready for, a realization of all the trauma that I had. And that's the beautiful wisdom of working with your own body, your own psyche, and going at your own pace, is that this whole system is really wise, and it knows how much it can take at a time, because I suffered from dissociation. And so that's like, yes, derealization, depersonalization, but also essentially through my traumatic experiences, I was fragmented, like my psyche was fragmented. And so that's been a big part of my work that I've been doing. But yeah, and so, at this treatment center, they first, they identified that I had a lot of shame, which that was offensive to me at the time. I was like, what are you talking about? No, I don't. Which we don't like. I mean, shame is like,
don't tell me what I feel.
Like, shame is hard. Shame is a hard experience to have. I mean, it feels awful, and we often do almost anything not to feel shame. We'll give it to somebody else. We'll shame them so we don't have to feel it. But yeah, so they told me, I had a lot of shame, and I was like, okay, we'll go with that. Fine. And then I started realizing that, yes, I did indeed have developmental trauma. So that's something I wanted to note, is that trauma isn't always, being in a near-death experience, like a car accident or, whatever. And it's not always, like childhood sexual abuse. It doesn't have to be these really big things. And, my very simplistic definition for what trauma is, anything that happened to you where you weren't able to process it because you didn't have the support, you didn't have safety, or it just happened too damn fast. Even sometimes when we have the support, if something happens real fast, we may hold that trauma in our body, and then, we'll have to process it, later. And that's just a very natural thing, because often, you're trying to survive the trauma, so you don't have time to process it. Your system is focused on the survival. And so it's not that you did anything wrong. In fact, you did everything right. You were doing exactly what you needed to do. And often that's helpful to trauma survivors to know that they did a lot right. They made it through. And so, I realized, yes, okay, I have developmental trauma, fine. And I won't go into all my, home life stuff, but yeah. And, it was hard for me to see, though, because, I came from a pretty well-to-do family. My father's a surgeon. And, I got all my basic, I don't even want to say basic needs, because that's not true. I had enough to eat, and I had nice clothes and all those things. And I had more than, a lot of people had, as far as being able to, maybe go on vacations and going to all the basketball and soccer camps and things like that. So, it was hard for me to wrap my head around it, that, oh no, you did not get what you needed. You did not get what you needed. And so, that was a good initial, introduction for, yes, you were traumatized. And then other stuff came up for me around some childhood sexual abuse. And then also just my very identity, who I am. I'm not a conventional person. I'm a pretty prismatic person. I don't necessarily fit in this society. I also, and I don't want to now. I mean, like, I look around and I'm like, it's okay with me. And then also, I don't necessarily fit in any little group. And in fact, I run with a lot of different groups, and some of those groups don't get along. And people are like, well, how can you be, say, queer and be a Christian at the same time? And I'm just like, well, just stick around and watch, that's kind of my answer. And, that happens for me a lot, but, I'm learning, the people that can handle my, unconventional self, and how I don't fit into any little pocket, those people do, they come and find you. They come and find you, and they may not agree with me on everything, but they love me. They love me.
Mhm.
And that's all I need. So, there was trauma in, whether it was because of society at large or the religion that I was in, or because of my family. But I knew, hunker down, stay down, don't be noticed. And so I made myself very small. I was very chameleon-like in nature. I could just blend in and not be seen in plain sight. That became a survival tool for me. But it also, essentially was, it was essentially self-harm, because I wasn't being fully myself. And so, when you, shut down parts of yourself, you're simply oppressing yourself. And that can very much lead to depression. And I think that happens for people a lot. Like, you're trying to survive in a group or in a society. And so you twist and turn yourself to make yourself fit. And then you end up oppressing yourself. Yeah, you're welcomed into certain groups, but you're not being welcoming to your entire self. And so that was huge. I mean, that was maybe, you hear like childhood sexual trauma, and that's like, ooh, that's not great. But I think probably what I was just talking about in terms of identity, that was probably the most trauma that occurred. Because yes, I was affected by other people, but then you have to deal with the trauma of, oh, I'm harming myself. And that's, a lot of self-betrayal, and just, making yourself small. And that's so traumatic. And, you have to deal with the trauma of the self-betrayal as well. And so, I just wanted to make note that trauma comes in different forms, and often people don't think about their trauma as trauma because we're so used to it, and it's just normalized. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. There's so many nuggets I can pull from what you just said, but to unpack what you shared, I want to point two things that are very relevant to this conversation. Number one is that how important it is for us to find the truth. And the truth a lot of times is, and that's where I believe healing begins, when we're willing to seek the truth. And a lot of times that truth involves us saying, I did not have a great childhood. And I want to share, put this because like you, I came from medium class family in Brazil. Yes, my mother made sure I had nice clothes, good food on the table. My mother had to be the provider. She was in a very stressful marriage with my father, which right there has created trauma, because trauma, again, it's you don't need to go through any of these big T traumas. Like, you don't need, in order to have trauma in your body, you don't have to have sexual abuse or live below poverty or the tragic loss of a caretaker like a mother or father, or being hit. Trauma simply means, like Dax shared here very well, is you go through difficult times in childhood where there's an emotional charge in your body, and usually that charge involves loss of safety. In the body of a child, there's a loss of safety at that moment. And the emotions can be overwhelming for the body of a child, for the brain of a child. And if we don't have a self-regulated, a calm, stable adult to hold us, to help us to deal with those emotions, that itself is a trauma. So we can pretty much say that all of us have gone through a level of trauma, because many of us were raised by very stressed out parents. I was raised by, an anxious mother who was in an abusive marriage with my father. There's a lot of verbal and emotional abuse there. But even though the abuse wasn't done directly to me, I witnessed that dynamics. And like you, I had to disassociate. So I don't have memories of those first 7, 8, 9 years of my life. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I was doing a lot of inner child work. It was only a couple of years ago that I was able to admit, oh my God, there's trauma. there was trauma in my life. I absorbed a lot, and I understood that I had anxiety my entire life. I
Yeah.
had what's called functional anxiety, which
Yeah.
is not enough it wasn't enough to make me have panic attacks. So I didn't go to doctors. And I'm kind of glad I didn't go to doctors and talked
Yeah.
about this, because they would have convinced me to take some kind of prescribed medication. But, they story like the fish doesn't know it's wet, even though it lives in water. And that was my case. Have anxiety my whole life, and I didn't know until I started doing some deeper work, because relationships were failing. I was broke. I needed to hit a crisis to start understanding what was happening, because I was reading all the books that you can see behind me of personal growth, self-help. And the more I read these books, the more I thought there's something wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
would follow with all this psychology and self-help books are telling me how to be successful in life. And the more I did that, because like you, I had that personality that like, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. I'm in charge of my life. And the more I read about that, actually, the more I thought there's something wrong with me, because I cannot be successful in this area. I cannot be successful in that area. So through that crisis of really, sitting in that place that there's something wrong with me and I'm not enough, which is the basis of a lot of trauma. And none of those thoughts, those beliefs will be fixed
Mm-hmm.
or cured with prescribed medication. So we need to do the work. So I think, the reason I'm sharing this to go with what you just shared is that we need to be able to stand in that truth that we're not supported, held emotionally the way we needed as a child, that there's love. And I say, love is not enough. So we basically lose that sense of safety in our childhood. And that's when we learn fear, we learn survival strategies. And I love that you mentioned that, Dax, that none of our survival strategies were wrong. It was an adaptation, so a way to survive.
Yeah.
And it's just the problem, those strategies that we used in childhood are not very efficient, or they don't help us as an adult. And that's what a lot of us are finding out, how those strategies helped us to survive. And yet we need to relearn in a way how to feel safe again. And I find safety the core of healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, so for example, maybe to find safety, if we didn't have that in a caregiver, a guardian, then maybe we did it by, like hiding or isolating, or just blending in, people pleasing, and so, yes, those are survival strategies, and there's no shame at all in doing that. Even if you're an adult and say you're in an abusive relationship for a while, you needed to do that for a little bit to get through. But then, once you get through, then often, you carry those survival strategies with you into new relationships and into jobs and just relating to yourself. And that's, not only do they not serve you, but often they can harm you and they can harm other people. And that's often, it's easy to demonize somebody when they've done you wrong, but often it is a survival strategy, and it's coming out towards you. And that doesn't make it okay. But I think, yes, doctors need to be trauma informed, and teachers, and, people like that. But really, as just a member of the society, it would serve us all well if everybody was somewhat trauma informed. And I know that's not going to happen. But I do think that it would, help. And so anybody listening, that's one thing you can do for other people and for yourself, is to learn about trauma, and also to, start healing your own. Because when you heal your own with the help of others, because we don't get through this ourselves, I do believe, yes, you heal you, and you heal within connection. It has to be both. And I've had very lonely times where I'm having to, just connect to the trees and the dirt and my dog and to God. And I'm not really getting exactly what I want from other people. And those people that I do need, they come along at the exact right time. And, I heal in community, I heal in relationship and connection. And so that's, one thing that I like to give my clients is the safety that they're needing that they didn't have when they were a child. Not so that I can be a parental figure, but, I may be an anchor for them if they're going through a crisis, or if they haven't learned to anchor themselves within themselves into their own spirit. And so I can model that, and I can be there for them for a certain time. And as I teach them to anchor within themselves and to, learn to be resourceful, and as they heal within that connection. And so, yeah, I just, we talked some about how, quote, mental illness is treated, almost in a vacuum, where it's like, oh, okay, you're going to be treated with this medication for your brain, or you're going to do, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, which, is one way you can go. But, it's limited. It's limited, and it's focused, more so on your mind. And, so we do often treat, mental illness just in kind of isolated ways within the self. But we also have to remember that, we did not, I did not become symptomatic all by myself. I had some help with that. It was the environment I was in. It was, it had to do with the family that I was in. It had to do with the religion that I was in. We are affected by our environment. And that's good news, because as adults, we can choose, in a lot of ways, not always. You may have to wait a little bit and learn how to survive maybe that job until you find a new one. But we do get a lot of choice. We get to influence the choices we make, and we can choose new environments. You can divorce that spouse. Will it be hard? And are you, probably you will have to deal with some attachment issues. Yeah, it's going to be very, very hard, and it's going to take you back to mommy, daddy, and it's going to be very hard to release some of that. But you can get out of romantic relationships. You can change jobs. You can find new communities. And will you sometimes have to go through loneliness? Absolutely. I've done my share. But we do get to have more choice with our environments, and that can become a very healing thing as well. Yeah,
I love it. I'm going to echo what you said about having help. And I hope, for those listening, if, depending where you are in your journey, don't let shame, don't think your story is worse than other people, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what levels of trauma that we all had, what is underneath that we all share. It might be shame, might be guilt, might be the belief that we're not enough. It's deep sadness, it's grief. At the end, we share the same emotions. It doesn't matter where you are in the planet. What is underneath trauma, it can be a tremendous sense of loneliness, grief, sadness, and we all share those emotions. So what I want to echo back here to you all is that find a community, find a teacher, find a therapist, find a coach that can hold your hand and walk with you, because yes, one of the reasons we hold trauma in the body is because as a child, we are not seen, heard, validated, and we didn't have gray mirrors, because we learned through mirroring, and we didn't have mirrors reflecting back to us love, joy, peace, calmness. So in a way, you want to find a teacher, whoever you choose to work with, and I'm sharing this with the audience, find a mirror. And sometimes, like you said, Dax, we take the role of the parent, not that we're going to become the parent, but we become the mirror that sees the potential of our client, the potential for healing. And I'm going to say this quote in capital letters here. Every single person has access to healing. Every single person can heal. It doesn't matter how big or small the trauma was. And having help along the path is crucial. I wouldn't be where I am without the help of teachers. And I still work with an amazing therapist teacher that I see on a weekly basis, sometimes, every other week, because it keeps addressing my blind spots. And even though I've done a lot of healing, some of those childhood trauma can still echo through my relationships, especially, and having attachment issues that we all work with when we don't learn secure attachment in childhood. So I think the biggest message here now is like, get help if anybody's struggling there, which leads me to one of my last questions here to you. Let's say somebody isn't listening to this conversation now, and they have been taking medications, right, for depression, for anxiety for many years. And of course, we all know well that those medications can be a lifesaver when done correctly in a short period of time. I have seen some of my friends and even clients taking medications for anywhere from 6 to 9 months, and it really helped them. And then they heal, they start working with a good therapist, they start healing their trauma, and they're doing amazing without any medication.
Yeah.
And with that said, there's a lot of fear around people taking medication, which we know the medication simply helps them to cope. It doesn't heal anything. It just helps them to cope with certain symptoms and overwhelming emotions.
Yeah.
So for those that want to start exploring with their doctors, which I always say out loud, have a conversation with your doctor if you're interested in cutting down your medication or cutting off.
Yeah.
They have a lot of fear. They fear the emotions they're going to start feeling once they come off the medication.
Yeah.
So what is your advice to them in terms of, the emotions are going to come because they've been numbing and suppressed with medication. So those emotions are going to come. So what would you advise them to do in that phase?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I should say that the reason I may have some helpful things to say is that I tried 20 different medications. A lot of people try them for longer periods of time. I gave it 1.5 years, and then I had like terrible side effects. I started losing my hair, blurry vision. I started having uncontrollable muscle movements, and I could list. I mean, I'll stop there. Those are some of the pretty crappy ones, but like terrible weight gain, sexual side effects, like all the things. Maybe I could list probably about 25 things, and any one of them were not great. And if something like that is happening on the outside, then my question is, what is going on internally with me, with my organs and my metabolic system and things like that. But yeah, so I tried many different medications. I was on as many as probably about 5 at a time. And I tapered off of them. And I tapered off of them slowly. I led my med taper, but my doctor oversaw it. She didn't quite, I didn't see that she had the skill set to taper me off in the way I needed to be tapered off. Most doctors, I don't think, do. I have 2 doctors that I send clients to if they're interested in tapering off medication. But yeah, and also this is probably to be noted too, and you can look at my page and look at my website, which is liminalmentalhealth.com. But the same doctor that diagnosed me as bipolar 1, at some point she eventually removed that diagnosis and diagnosed me with PTSD. And so, people say, well, you can't heal from bipolar disorder. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm not going to fight you on that, but I was symptomatic in such a way to be diagnosed as bipolar 1, and now I'm not. So if that's not healing, I don't know what is. So that's why I have a little bit to say about all this, because I've experienced it. But if you're interested, meds aren't serving you, or there's something within your gut saying, this is not what I need, or this is not what I need forever, then 100%, I always recommend that a medical provider is on board. With clients, I do help people advocate for themselves with their doctor. I can do that. I never tell anybody to get on meds or to get off meds. That's not my place. That's the client's work, for one. And then two, that's not my area. I'm not a medical professional. Because I mean, one big reason is that I don't think what we call mental illness is necessarily a medical thing until the medical system makes it one by diagnosing us and telling us these stories. So I look at all of it in a completely different way. I look at it as human beings, just being human beings under chronic stress or having, trauma within their body, which that could look like, having some physical ailments as well. Inflammation can lead to many things. And so it's all connected. But yeah, one thing, it's going to sound like a plug, and I guess it kind of is, but like, come see me. I've been through this. And I can tell you what my experience was getting off psych meds. I can tell you what I know about others' experiences. I can point you to more resources to look into it yourself. If people are interested in getting off psych meds, the doctor needs to be involved in the actual tapering process, because a lot of times, you need to have your vitals looked at. They can talk about the different ways that the medicines will work with each other and what might be best to taper off of first, things like that. So you need to talk to your doctor about those things. And, even the two doctors that I send people to, one of them says, that she doesn't have time to do what I do. And what I do is help people with some of, mindset around, tapering, because we often get addicted, psychologically. We get addicted emotionally. A lot of times attachment issues come up with medication. And it's a perfect time. That was part of my healing process, because I had to get off these medications for me. And so then I had to revisit some old things from childhood. And so it ended up being, yes, a very big challenge, but it ended up being a healing process, because then I did have the support with my psychiatrist, a couple different therapists, different, friends, and a couple of family members that were helpful. And so I had that safety. So I could look at those things, but yeah, do some research. You can look at my page. You can look at, Dr. Kelly Brogan, Ellen Vora, and then look at like the trauma specialist if you want to look into that. So a lot of it is, the personal responsibility and interest that you might have in looking at, some of these things. The Inner Compass Initiative is a good website to look at. Some
Can you
things
say that again, Dax?
Sure.
Can you say
the Inner Compass Initiative. That's one website I looked at. It's another psychiatric survivor. I can't remember her name right now. I think she has an Instagram account. I can't remember, but I would just go to the website. And then there's like a sister company, or a sister website. And I can't remember what it's called at this moment, but it's really focused on the med taper portion. And I have
I'm just gonna say, if anybody wants these resources,
yeah,
I'll recommend that you reach directly to Dax at Liminal Mental Health. Liminal, LIMINAL Mental Health. I'm also gonna mention your website in the notes on below this video.
Yeah.
So contact you for the resources, because it sounds like you can really.
Yeah, I can rattle off. I could go all day.
Yeah.
I had to look at so many things and piece it all together. And that's one of my goals, is to be kind of like a hub where people can come to me. And yes, like I work with clients around some nervous system regulation and some, mindfulness tools, and, on and on it goes. You can look at my website on things I can offer. And, I can point people to other resources so they can, educate themselves, because we can only do so much, in an hour long. And, one of the ways that I got better was, yes, connecting to a safe person and looking into some deep things about myself, but on the side, I was constantly, it sounds like you were too, like reading, whether it was medical journals or it was things about trauma or other people's stories, about bipolar disorder really being maybe for them. It sounded like it was a spiritual experience, which it was for me. It was a spiritual emergence. It was not a medical problem. It was me trying to be me. And me having a hard time with that. That's it in a nutshell. And so, come see me. You can schedule an appointment at my website. And then also my Instagram account is Red River Riding Hood. That's my big account. I also have a liminal mental health page that I just started. But my other page, Red River Riding Hood, is, it has a lot more of my writing there.
Oh, that's how I found you. I'll recommend you all, if you Instagram, follow her posts, because she posts some really cool things, and it's a great way also to get in touch with you. So to summarize what you just shared, what I hear is, I am in full agreement. If you are somebody out there considering tapering off your medications or find other ways to heal, to cope, whatever, anywhere that you are in your path, do that with your MD, with your doctor, combining with some kind of healing, either with a skilled somatic therapist or with a coach like myself or Dax, who understand how to take you back to your body, because healing really happens in your body. So talk therapy can be helpful, and yet it's just going to give you more coping strategies, and it's not going to heal whatever the trauma, little trauma, big trauma, it doesn't matter. These emotions that are stored in our bodies from childhood are stored in the body in form of energy, and we need to learn how to go into the body. So just make sure you work with somebody that has some kind of somatic expertise that can take you to the body and help you and teach you how to feel these emotions without getting overwhelmed with the emotions. And don't fear your emotions. Emotions are designed to help us to survive, and they help us to experience life. That is the deliciousness of this life. We get to experience sadness when we lose a friend or a lover. We get to experience joy and bliss and ecstasy. So the problem is when you shut down from, shut yourself down from feeling the emotions, you're also going to shut yourself down from feeling the beautiful, positive, we call positive emotions. So learn how to embrace it all, because you're an amazing human being. And I hope that this conversation ignited a lot of curiosity and empower you all there to become an advocate of your health, no matter if it's, in the mental body, in the physical body, on the heart and the lungs, I don't care. But whatever it is, understand that every illness is a mind-body process. We don't need any more proof of that. And get curious about your process, because the same way that we unconsciously create illness and disease, we also create healing and well-being, and we have that power. And it's just the medical system hasn't caught up with that yet, and they're not teaching people how to truly heal. That's why I'm grateful to you, Dax, and many other doctors that are walking away from the structures of the medical system and the medical universities. And again, we're not here pointing fingers and blaming anybody. It's a system, and it's complex, and it's going to take time to change. So how we can accelerate this change? By each one of us getting educated. And we live in an era that the education is available to everybody. There's free resources, like we share in this video for free. If you find value in this video, please share with your family, friends, and your social media channels, because this message is extremely important. This conversation could be the conversation that somebody needs to hear right now in order to find hope and to feel empowered. So, Dax, before I let you go, is there any message you want to share with the audience?
I would just say, I want to encourage people to allow themselves to be human. You know, we do, you know, diagnoses sometimes can be helpful, can be a helpful place to start sometimes. But you know, we hear this all the time, but you are more than your diagnosis. You're more than your symptoms. And often these symptoms are simply an expression of needs not being met. And, you know, we're complex human beings, we're messy, you know, and that's why sometimes these systems that are meant to help us, they don't help us because systems don't have a beating heart, you know. And so that's why I show up as I do, because I want to be a safe place. I want to connect with people and remind them that, yeah, you're human, and you can have, you can be sad, you can grieve, you can be confused, you can feel feelings and you don't know why. Like, all of this is okay. And yeah, just want to encourage people to allow themselves to be human beings, fully expressed human beings, messy human beings. That's okay. That's okay. And it's what this life is all about.
Beautiful. I think this is a great place to stop, and I hope we have another conversation very soon.
Sounds
and
good.
Again, to our listeners, check the notes that are going to be below this video on YouTube or social media with Dax information, her contact info on Instagram, her email, so you can ask her questions and use her life experience, her knowledge, and how to help you to become free and heal yourself. So Dax, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.